My SIL publicly mocked me at the wedding. My brother silenced the whole room. My sister-in-law mocked me for being left in front of the whole crowd. I wanted to leave the wedding immediately, but my brother stopped me. And what happened next was not what I and my sister-in-law expected. The invitation arrived on a Tuesday. Ivory cardstock with gold embossing that caught the afternoon light streaming through my kitchen window. I turned it over in my hands several times before working up the courage to break the wax seal. My brother was getting married, and somehow, despite everything, I was invited. Mom, is that from Uncle Scott? My daughter Jess peered over my shoulder, her dark curls tickling my cheek. At 16, she still maintained the curiosity of a child, especially about family matters. Yes, sweetheart, he's marrying Layla in June. I forced enthusiasm into my voice, though my stomach had already begun to knot. Are we going? She asked, reaching for the invitation to admire the calligraphy. I hesitated. Scott and I had always been close growing up, but since my divorce 3 years ago, family gatherings had become exercises in endurance. My mother's pointed comments about failing to keep a man, the pitying glances from aunts and cousins, the way conversations would halt when I approached, as if my divorce were contagious. And then there was Layla. My future sister-in-law had never bothered to hide her disdain for me. During our first meeting at my parents' anniversary dinner, she'd asked loudly across the table if I was dating again, or if I was still too bitter. I'd nearly choked on my water. While my mother had chuckled approvingly. We should go, Jess said, breaking into my thoughts. Uncle Scott would want us there. She was right, of course, despite everything. Scott had remained my ally when David left me for his 24-year-old assistant. Scott was the one who helped me move, who set up my new apartment while I sat shell-shocked on the couch. He deserved my support on his big day, even if it meant enduring Layla and the rest of the family. We'll go, I agreed, running my fingers through Jess's hair. We'll find you something beautiful to wear. I didn't add that I'd be wearing the only formal dress I owned, a navy blue sheath I'd bought on clearance for a work function. Some battles weren't worth fighting, and my depleted bank account, courtesy of David's refusal to pay child support on time, meant new clothes were a luxury I couldn't afford. Not that my family would understand that. They never did. The arrival. The White Cliff Resort sprawled across 20 acres of perfectly manicured grounds, its stone facade gleaming in the June sunshine like something from a fairy tale. Luxury cars lined the circular driveway, discharging guests in designer outfits that probably cost more than my monthly rent. I smoothed the wrinkles from my dress as we approached, suddenly self-conscious about the scuff marks on my only pair of heels. This place is amazing, Jess whispered, wide-eyed as we entered the grand foyer. Crystal chandeliers cast rainbow prisms across marble floors, and the air smelled of roses and expensive perfume. Diana, you actually came... My mother's voice carried across the space, her tone suggesting she'd placed bets against my appearance. She air-kissed my cheeks, careful not to smudge her makeup, then held me at arm's length. That dress again? Well, I suppose it's practical. Before I could respond, she turned to Jess with genuine warmth. And look at you growing more beautiful every day. Come, your grandfather wants to see you. I watched them walk away, my mother's arm around my daughter's shoulders, already whispering what I knew would be subtle digs about my parenting. It was her specialty preserving her perfect grandmother image with Jess while systematically undermining me. D.I., Scott's voice broke through my thoughts. He engulfed me in a bear hug that lifted me off my feet. At 36, my younger brother still had the exuberance of a college athlete. I wasn't sure you'd make it. And miss my little brother's wedding never. I smiled, genuinely happy to see him despite everything. Where's the lucky bride? Getting ready with her bridesmaids. His smile flickered. Listen, Di, I wanted to thank you for coming. I know things have been strained. It's fine, I said, waving away his concern. This is your day. I'm just happy to be here for you. He squeezed my shoulder. That means a lot. I've got to make the rounds, but I'll catch up with you at the reception, okay? I nodded, watching him weave through the growing crowd. Guests greeted him with easy laughter and congratulatory slaps on the back. Scott had always been the family favorite, successful architect, charming personality, and now, a picture perfect wedding. Everything I had failed to achieve, according to my mother's frequent reminders. The ceremony itself was beautiful, I had to admit. White roses cascaded from every surface, and a string quartet played softly as Layla floated down the aisle in a gown that probably cost more than my car. Even from my seat near the back, family was supposed to be at the front. But somehow my assigned seat was in the 14th row. I could see Scott's face light up as she approached. I blinked away unexpected tears. Despite my reservations about Layla, it was moving to see my brother so happy. He deserved that joy, even if it came packaged with a woman who referred to my divorce as that unfortunate business with Diana, as if it were a minor scandal I'd orchestrated for attention. As the minister pronounced them husband and wife, I clapped along with everyone else, pushing aside the voice in my head that whispered this marriage was joining me to Layla in a way I'd never wanted. For Scott's sake, I would try, I would smile, I would blend into the background and get through this day with grace. If only I had known what was coming. The ballroom was a vision in white and gold, with towering floral arrangements and tables draped in silk. I found my name card at table 19, far from the head table where my parents sat, with Scott and Layla. Even Jess had been placed at table 4 with my cousin's children, closer to the action than her own mother. I recognized no one at my table, a collection of Layla's distant relatives and work acquaintances who eyed me with disinterest when I introduced myself as the groom's sister. The elderly man beside me squinted at my left hand, noticing the pale band of skin where my wedding ring had once been. "Divorced?" he asked bluntly, between bites of salmon. "Yes," I replied, taking a large sip of wine. "Shame." He nodded sagely, as if confirming a suspicion. "My niece's husband left her too. Some women just can't hold on to a man." I stared at him, speechless, as he returned to his dinner without awaiting my response. 3 years since David had walked out, and the assumptions still stung as freshly as they had the day he announced he was leaving. The truth was both simpler and more painful than anyone in my family seemed to understand. David hadn't left because I'd failed as a wife. He'd left because he wanted someone new, someone who hadn't witnessed his failures and insecurities, someone who still looked at him with uncomplicated adoration. The fact that this someone was barely older than his own daughter was just the final insult. Jess caught my eye from her table and gave me an encouraging smile. I smiled back, grateful that my wonderful, perceptive daughter had insisted on coming. Without her, I might have succumbed to the temptation to slip away unnoticed. The clinking of glasses signaled the beginning of the speeches. I braced myself. In our family, speeches were rarely simple expressions of goodwill. They were performances, carefully crafted to entertain and, occasionally, to wound. The best man went first with the traditional embarrassing stories about Scott's college years, earning appreciative laughter. Then Scott's closest friend from work shared a touching anecdote about how Scott had talked about Layla from their very first date. It was sweet, and I found myself smiling despite my unease. Then Layla stood, resplendent in her designer gown, and tapped her glass with a silver spoon. The room fell silent. "I want to thank everyone for being here today," she began, her voice carrying easily through the space, "especially those who traveled so far to celebrate with us." Her gaze swept the room, warm and gracious, the perfect bride on her perfect day. "I'm so blessed to be joining the Matthews family," she continued, raising her glass toward my parents. "Catherine and Richard, thank you for raising such an incredible man, and for welcoming me with such open arms." My mother beamed, nodding regally as if accepting tribute from a subject. My father looked uncomfortable but pleased, never one for public attention. "And of course," Layla added, her tone shifting subtly, "I have to acknowledge my new sister-in-law, Diana." My head snapped up. A cold sensation spread through my chest. Layla had never once referred to me as her sister-in-law before. "Diana has been," Layla paused dramatically, "such an example for me. The room quieted further, anticipation building. I gripped my napkin under the table. She's shown me exactly what kind of wife not to be. Layla's voice turned playful, inviting the audience to join her joke. I mean, look at her sitting over there, still wearing the same dress from 3 Christmases ago because her husband ran off with someone young enough to actually give him children. The first ripple of laughter moved through the room. I froze, my face burning. But seriously, Layla continued, I've learned so much from watching Diana's situation. Lesson number 1, don't let yourself go after the honeymoon. Lesson number 2, men have needs. Ladies, ignore them at your peril. More laughter, louder now. I couldn't move, couldn't breathe. I felt every eye in the room on me, saw the smirks, the knowing glances, the uncomfortable shifts from those who recognized the cruelty but wouldn't speak against it. I promised Scott I'd make this short, so let me just say thank you, Diana, for being our cautionary tale. At least someone in the family had to be the example of failure, so the rest of us could shine. The room erupted in laughter and applause. Through my haze of humiliation, I saw my mother wiping tears of mirth from her eyes. I saw Jess, horrified and rigid at her table. And I saw Scott, his face a mask of shock as he stared at his new wife. I stood abruptly, my chair scraping loudly against the floor. I needed air. I needed to escape the stares. The laughter, the cruel satisfaction in Layla's eyes as she watched me crumble. With as much dignity as I could muster, I walked toward the exit, head high despite the tears threatening to spill. Behind me, I heard the scrape of another chair, then Scott's voice, cutting through the fading laughter like a knife. Enough, one word, spoken with such quiet authority that the entire room fell silent. I paused at the doorway, unable to help myself. Diana, Scott said, still standing. Please wait. I turned slowly, arms crossed over my chest as if that could protect me from further humiliation. Scott looked at Layla, his expression hardened into something I'd rarely seen on my gentle brother's face. That wasn't funny. That was cruel and completely uncalled for. Layla's smile faltered. It was just a joke, babe. Everyone was laughing. And that makes it okay. Scott's voice rose slightly. To humiliate my sister on what should be a day of celebration for our entire family. The room was utterly silent now, the tension palpable. Layla reached for Scott's arm. You're overreacting? He pulled away from her touch. No, I'm finally reacting. He turned to face the room at large. I want to apologize to my sister. Diana has been through more than most of you know, and she's handled it with more grace and strength than anyone I've ever met. My breath caught in my throat as Scott continued, his eyes finding mine across the room. When her husband walked out, she didn't crumble. She worked 2 jobs to keep a roof over her daughter's head. She never missed a single one of Jess's school events despite working 60-hour weeks. She rebuilt her life from scratch without complaint or bitterness. He turned toward our mother, his gaze hardening. And you, Mom, I saw you laughing. Your own daughter was being mocked and humiliated, and you laughed. My mother's face drained of color. Scott, this isn't the time. When is the time? Mom, after another family dinner where you subtly remind Diana of her failures. After another Christmas where you give Jess expensive gifts while handing Diana discount store candles. The rawness in his voice cracked something open in me. Years of holding it together, of absorbing the small cuts and jabs with a smile, suddenly felt unbearable. A tear slipped down my cheek, but I didn't wipe it away. For once, I wasn't ashamed of my pain. I've watched for 3 years, Scott continued, his voice steadier now. I've watched my family treat Diana like she committed some unforgivable sin by being left, as if being abandoned somehow makes her less worthy of respect and love. He turned back to Layla, who stood frozen beside him, her perfect bridal image shattered by the fury in his eyes. And now this, using our wedding, a day that should represent love and unity, to publicly humiliate the person who has supported me through every challenge in my life. He shook his head. I can't do this. A collective gasp rippled through the room. Layla's eyes widened. What are you saying? Scott removed his wedding ring, placing it deliberately on the table before them. I'm saying I made a mistake. I can't marry someone who would treat my sister, who would treat anyone with such calculated cruelty. The silence that followed was absolute. No one moved, no one spoke. It was as if the entire room was holding its breath, waiting for someone to declare that this was all part of the entertainment, an elaborate prank that would end in laughter and relief. But Scott was already walking toward me, his steps measured and certain. When he reached me, he took my hand. "Let's go, die, you don't have to stay for this." As we walked out together, his arm around my shoulders, I heard the chaos erupting behind us, Layla's angry shouts, my mother's frantic attempts to intervene, guests murmuring in shocked disbelief. In the grand foyer, Jess was waiting, her young face solemn as she took my other hand. "Are you okay?" "Mom," she asked quietly. I looked at my daughter, then at my brother. For the first time in 3 years, I answered that question honestly. "No," I said, "but I will be." We sat in the hotel bar, a bizarre trio in formal wear at 2 in the afternoon. Scott had ordered whiskey. Neat. I nursed a glass of wine. Jess sipped a Shirley Temple, looking far older than her 16 years as she studied us both with worried eyes. "You didn't have to do that," I finally said. "It was your wedding day." Scott laughed, but there was no humor in it. What kind of wedding day begins with the bride publicly humiliating my family? What kind of marriage would follow? Still, I hesitated, guilt creeping in. Everyone was there. The expense. Mom and Dad will be. "Stop." Scott set his glass down firmly. "This isn't your fault, Diana. None of it is. Not David leaving, not Mom's cruelty, and certainly not what happened today." I stared into my wine glass, unconvinced. Part of me, the part that had been carefully cultivated by years of subtle blame, still felt responsible. If only I'd been a better wife, a better daughter, a better sister. If only I hadn't come to the wedding at all. "She's always been like this," Scott continued, almost to himself. Little comments here and there that I brushed off as bad jokes. The way she talked about her friends behind their backs. I told myself everyone does that. He took another sip of whiskey. But what she did today, that was deliberate, calculated. "But you loved her," I said softly. "I thought I did." He ran a hand through his hair, dislodging the boutonniere that was still pinned to his lapel. Or maybe I loved the idea of her, the perfect, polished life she represented. He looked at me directly, the life Mom always wanted for me. There it was, the unspoken truth that had shaped both our lives, our mother's relentless pursuit of the perfect family image. Scott, the successful son with the beautiful wife. Me, the daughter who had failed to maintain the facade. "What will you do now?" Jess asked, breaking the heavy silence. Scott shrugged, a gesture so boyish it momentarily transported me back to our childhood, to simpler hurts with simpler remedies. Damage control, I guess. Return gifts. Cancel the honeymoon. Face Mom's wrath. "We'll help," I said automatically. The big sister instinct never really fades. "No." Scott's tone was firm. "You've dealt with enough family fallout. This is my mess to clean up." He hesitated, then added, "Though I might need a place to crash for a few days, I'm not ready to face the Inquisition yet." "Our couch is yours," I said, feeling the first genuine smile of the day tugging at my lips. Though it's not exactly the honeymoon suite in Bali. "Better company, though." Scott clinked his glass against mine, and for a moment, we were kids again, allied against the world. My phone buzzed insistently on the table, my mother. No doubt, calling to demand explanations or assign blame. I silenced it without looking. "Aren't you going to answer?" Jess asked. I shook my head. "Not today." A strange lightness filled me as I made this small act of defiance. "Today, I think I'm done being everyone's emotional punching bag." Scott raised his glass. "I'll drink to that." We stayed in the bar until evening, talking about everything and nothing, carefully avoiding the wedding disaster. When we finally left, stepping out into the cool spring twilight, I felt different somehow, lighter, as if something that had been pressing on my chest for years had finally lifted. My phone showed 17 missed calls and 23 text messages. I turned it off without reading any of them. The following week passed in a blur of normalcy so profound it felt almost surreal after the wedding chaos. I went to work at the university administration office. Jess attended her last week of school before summer break. Scott slept on our couch and cooked elaborate meals to compensate for his intrusion, though we assured him repeatedly that his presence was welcome. The only unusual element was the complete silence from the rest of the family. No calls from my mother after my initial refusal to engage. No messages from distant relatives fishing for gossip. Nothing but a strange, peaceful quiet that I knew couldn't last. It broke on Saturday morning, exactly 1 week after the wedding. That wasn't. I was making pancakes, our weekend tradition, when the doorbell rang. Scott, still in the t-shirt and sweatpants he'd slept in, glanced at me with apprehension. "Want me to get it?" he offered. I wiped my hands on a dish towel. "No, I've got it." Through the peephole, I saw my mother, impeccably dressed as always in a tailored pantsuit, her hair and makeup flawless despite the early hour. I hesitated, then opened the door just enough to stand in the gap. "Mom," I said neutrally, "this is a surprise." She didn't ask to come in, which was itself unusual. Instead, she stood stiffly, clutching her handbag with white-knuckled fingers. "Is Scott here?" she asked. "He's not answering his phone." "He's here," I confirmed, making no move to invite her inside. "He's been helping Jess with her science project." My mother nodded, her eyes darting past me to the apartment interior. "I need to speak with both of you." I considered refusing but decided against it. Whatever this conversation would be, it was overdue. "Wait here," I said, closing the door to fetch Scott. He had already changed into jeans and a button-down, somehow sensing the need for armor against whatever was coming. Together, we opened the door. "Can we talk outside?" my mother asked, glancing meaningfully at the apartment. "Privately?" Scott crossed his arms. "Anything you need to say. You can say in front of Jess, too." My mother's lips thinned, but she nodded. "Fine." We settled in the living room, an awkward tableau, my mother perched on the edge of the armchair, as if afraid to fully commit to sitting. Scott and I on the couch, and Jess hovering in the kitchen doorway, half hidden but clearly listening. "I've spent the week dealing with the aftermath of your decision," my mother began, looking at Scott. "The gifts have been returned. The venue partial refund has been processed. Layla's parents are still threatening legal action for the deposits they can't recover." Scott nodded, unsurprised. "I'll cover whatever costs remain." "That's not why I'm here." My mother's voice softened slightly. "I'm here because your father and I have had a lot of talks this week about family, about how we've been treating Diana." She turned to me, and for the first time in years, I saw something vulnerable in her expression. "About how I've been treating you." I waited, not quite ready to believe this was leading where it seemed to be. "The things Layla said at the reception," my mother continued, "they were cruel, unnecessary, and my reaction by none." She looked down at her hands. "It was inexcusable." "Yes, it was," I said quietly. My mother flinched slightly at my directness, but nodded. "Yes, and it wasn't just that day. It's been years of subtle criticisms and unfair comparisons. Your father pointed out that I've been punishing you for David's choices, as if his leaving somehow reflected on your worth." The admission hung in the air between us. Years of hurt distilled into a simple truth I'd always known but had never heard acknowledged. "Why?" I asked. The question that had burned in me for 3 years. "Why did you turn on me when I needed support the most?" My mother's composure cracked just slightly, a tremor in her perfectly applied foundation. "Because you were living my greatest fear," she whispered. "Being left, being deemed insufficient by the person who promised to love you forever." The revelation stunned me into silence. My mother, perfect, poised, perpetually in control. Catherine Matthews was afraid of abandonment. "When it happened to you," she continued, "it was like watching my own nightmare play out, and instead of supporting you, I distanced myself. As if your pain were contagious. As if criticizing you could somehow prove that what happened to you could never happen to me." Scott reached for my hand, squeezing it gently. "That's pretty messed up, Mom," he said, but his tone held more sadness than accusation. She nodded. "Yes, it is, and I'm sorry, Diana, so very sorry." I'd imagined this moment countless times, my mother finally acknowledging the hurt she had caused. In my fantasies, I'd been gracious and forgiving. instantly healing the rift between us. But reality was more complicated. I appreciate your apology, I said carefully, but I need you to understand something. The way you've treated me these past 3 years, the comments, the exclusion, the constant reminders of my failure, it's changed something between us. It's changed me. My mother's eyes widened slightly. I'm not the same person who desperately sought your approval at any cost, I continued, finding strength in voicing these truths. I don't need you to think I'm successful or worthy or whole. I know that I am, regardless of what happened with David or what anyone thinks about it. Jess moved from her position by the doorway, coming to sit beside me. Her silent support gave me courage to finish. If you want to be part of our lives, mine and Jess's, it needs to be on different terms. With respect, with real love, not conditional approval based on whether we're maintaining the right image. The silence that followed felt endless. My mother stared at me as if seeing me for the first time, not as her disappointing daughter, but as a woman with her own boundaries and strength. I understand, she finally said, and I'd like to try, if you'll let me. It wasn't a magical resolution. It wasn't an immediate healing of years of hurt, but it was a beginning, and for now, that was enough. After my mother left, promising to call in a few days to arrange a proper dinner, the three of us remained on the couch, emotionally drained, but somehow lighter. That was brave, Scott said, bumping my shoulder with his. Standing up to Mom is no small feat. You did it first, I reminded him, in front of 200 wedding guests. He laughed, the sound more relaxed than I'd heard since the wedding. Not my most tactful moment, but one of your best, I countered seriously. What you did that day, standing up for me like that, it changed something. Scott, it helped me remember who I really am. He looked at me curiously. And who is that? I smiled, wrapping one arm around Jess and extending the other to include my brother in the embrace. Someone who doesn't need to be seated in the hallway of her own life anymore. 3 months after the wedding, that wasn't. I stood in my newly painted living room, admiring the transformation. Gone were the beige walls I'd lived with since moving in, a color chosen for its inoffensiveness, its ability to fade into the background just as I had tried to do. In their place was a rich, vibrant teal that made the whole space feel alive. It's perfect, Jess declared, stepping back to admire our weekend's work. Her hair was pulled into a messy bun, with streaks of paint highlighting her dark curls. It really is. Scott agreed. He'd come over to help with the higher sections, turning our painting project into an impromptu family day. Family. The word had taken on new meaning in the months since the wedding disaster. My relationship with my mother remained complicated, but real change was happening in small, significant ways. She'd started therapy, at my father's insistence. She called without criticism, actually listening when I spoke, last week. She'd even asked Jess about her college aspirations without immediately suggesting she aim for Ivy League schools. As for Layla, she had moved back to her hometown, reportedly telling friends that she dodged a bullet by not marrying into our dysfunctional family. Scott had processed his grief quickly, admitting that their relationship had always felt more like a performance than a partnership. The doorbell rang, interrupting my thoughts. That'll be the pizza, Scott said, heading for the door with his wallet. But it wasn't the delivery person. It was David, my ex-husband, standing awkwardly in the hallway with an envelope in his hand. Diana, he said, clearly surprised to see paint smudges on my face and old clothes. In our marriage. I had never let him see me less than put together. I tried calling. My phone's off while we paint, I explained, automatically smoothing my hair before catching myself. What do you need? David? He seemed taken aback by my directness. The old Diana would have invited him in, offered him coffee, made accommodations despite his unannounced visit. I brought Jess's school money, he said, holding out the envelope. And I wanted to talk to you about the summer schedule. Dad? Jess appeared beside me, her expression guarded. Their relationship had been strained since the divorce, his sporadic attention leaving her wary of disappointment. David's face softened. Hey, kiddo, you've grown. Scott materialized behind us, his protective presence a comfort without being intrusive. David's eyes narrowed slightly at the sight of him. covered in the same paint that marked Jess and me. Looks like I'm interrupting a family project, David said, a strange note in his voice. Was it regret, jealousy? We're repainting the apartment, Jess explained. Uncle Scott's been helping. David nodded slowly. That's nice. He handed me the envelope. I should have called her first. I'll go now. Wait, I said, surprising myself. About the summer schedule. Jess and I are taking a trip to the Grand Canyon the last 2 weeks of July. It's her choice for our first real vacation in years. David blinked, clearly thrown by my matter-of-fact tone. In the past, I would have apologetically asked if it interfered with his plans, ready to rearrange our lives to accommodate him. That sounds great, he managed. I'll work around it. As he turned to leave, I felt a curious sense of closure. For so long, David's abandonment had felt like the defining moment of my adult life, the proof of my insufficiency. Now, watching him walk away, I recognized it for what it truly was, one chapter in a much longer story. A painful one, certainly, but not the end, not even close. Back inside, Scott had already resumed his painting, humming slightly off-key to the radio. You okay? He asked as I picked up my roller. I considered the question seriously, testing the weight of it against the events of the past few months, the humiliation at the wedding, the unexpected defense, the painful but necessary confrontations that followed, the small, steady rebuilding of myself without reference to anyone else's expectations. Yes, I said finally, dipping my roller in the vibrant teal paint. I really am. That evening, as we ate pizza on a picnic blanket in the middle of the newly painted living room furniture pushed to the center and covered with drop cloths, I looked at my small, unconventional family unit and felt a contentment that had nothing to do with perfection. What are you smiling about? Jess asked, nudging me with her foot. I glanced around at our paint-splattered clothes, the mismatched plates, the half-empty pizza boxes, and the vibrant walls surrounding us like a declaration. I'm just thinking about how sometimes the most beautiful things come from unexpected disruptions, I said, like weddings that don't happen, or perfect plans that fall apart. Scott raised his paper cup of soda. To beautiful disruption, then, we clinked our cups together, laughing as Jess's soda sloshed over the rim onto the drop cloth. There would be more challenges ahead, I knew, more difficult conversations with my mother, more complicated co-parenting with David, more moments of doubt and fear. But for the first time in years, I wasn't facing those challenges from a place of shame or unworthiness. I had been seated in the hallway, but I had left on my own terms. And in that leaving, I had found my way home,